Hey everyone, and welcome to another Vector Tuts Plus video tutorial. Today we're going to be creating a stylized vector Rubik's Cube. My name's Ryan Quintel, and I'll be walking you through this intermediate level tutorial. Now before we begin, I want to say that this written tutorial is written in Illustrator CS3, so you'll notice some slight differences in the way the Pathfinder behaves. That being said, let's fire up Illustrator and get started. First, we're going to create a new web document. Name it something fun. How about Rubik's Cubes are da bomb. Welcome back to 1997. Width 900, height 900, hit OK. Now, the written tutorial quotes this as a 90-minute endeavor, and I think we can shave a little time off that with a little forethought in how we set up our cube. First, we're going to go to our rectangle tool and click once. Here, create a 360 pixel by 360 pixel rectangle, or square really in this case. Color it red, and delete the stroke. Now with this, we're going to split this into a grid. That would be Object, Path, and Split into Grid. We're going to have 3 rows, and the gutter will be 0. We'll also have 3 columns with a 0 gutter. And you can see what that does. Hit OK. Now that this is split up into a grid, you notice it's different parts. So select them all and group them with Ctrl-G. Now we're going to go to Effect, 3D, Extrude and Bevel. And the settings the tutorial calls for are -77 on the X, -32 on the Y, and -5 on the Z, with a perspective of 30 degrees and an extrude depth of 360, keeping that 360 very consistent. You can turn on preview to see what that'll look like, and hit OK. Now we're going to go to Object and Expand, and you can see there's a lot of lines now inside of this cube. We're not going to need all of them, and we'll take care of that later. For now, we're going to make a new layer and lock down our original layer 1. In fact, we'll call it layer 1 cube. Now on layer 2, we're going to make some grids. If you don't know where the grid tool is, it's actually the line tool underneath the text tool. Hold your mouse down on it, and you'll see rectangular grid tool as an option. I'm going to click once on the canvas, and then create a 360 by 360 grid with 2 dividers, horizontal and vertical. And I'm not going to check off use outside rectangle as a frame, so leave that unchecked. Hit OK. For the sake of seeing this, I'm going to put this as a black stroke and even beef up the width. There you guys go, that's nice and visible. And now we use the free transform command to kind of make this happen. Now, we saved ourselves some time in the setup, so we're going to be able to speed through what is typically steps 5 through 15 in the tutorial. So we'll take this grid and we'll Control-C and Control-V, copy and paste, and then using the free transform, which is underneath the push tool, start dragging a corner and then hold down Control, and you can see as you drag that, it lets you skew the rectangle. I'll change this. Illustrator gave me kind of a bad outline color to start off. Blue is a little bit more visible, and you can see it transforming that grid. Now you can just sort of loose leaf line up these corners to what you're seeing. And you can see you don't have to be fully exact with this, but you do want it to have a pretty realistic perspective. So take your time getting it to where you need it to be. I'm going to grab this second and do the exact same thing. I like to put them sort of into position first, then use that free transform tool to get the rest of the job done. Now what you will notice here that is different from the written tutorial is that we're only going to be lining up the middle two lines in these grids. So really the middle of these grids are the only things that have to align with each other, and you'll see why shortly. A lot of that will be manual tweaking you'll have to fiddle and fuss with. And now after those are free transformed, we're going to delete most of these lines. So take your direct selection tool, the white arrow, and start highlighting pretty much everything except for the middle lines and just tapping delete. Delete, delete. We don't need those either. Now what we're going to do is we're going to make a second cube layer, or a layer above cube. We're going to call it faces. We'll unlock the cube layer. And here we're going to use the direct selection tool to select. Now you can see we already divided this perfectly the other way using that grid that we initially set up. So we're going to select the first face, 1, 2, 3, and then our two lines, 1 and 2, and hit the divide command in the Pathfinder. And there, that's split into a grid. Same thing here, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, and divide again, and we've got a pretty good looking grid. The bottom was automatically split into a grid, so we'll use the direct selection command to select every visible square we can. Now if you want to bust out your math skills, 3 by 3 is 9, 9 times 3 is 27, so you should have 27 squares selected. And that's about all the math I want to do for the next 3 years. So with all of those selected, in the layers palette, use our selected art dragger. So this is sort of, you drag this tiny little square here, and you drag it onto the faces layer. And the one above, drag that down to the faces layer. And then the cube layer, you can simply just delete. And what we have here is a completely divided Rubik's Cube, and I'll turn on the stroke so you can see what we have. Now this next part's a lot of fun and adds a lot of aesthetically pleasing attributes to this Rubik's Cube. We're going to round off all these squares, and it's actually a visual fact that a rounded edge is easier to look at, so that'll help you understand why this is such an attractive Rubik's Cube. First we'll select all of our faces here, and we're going to turn off the fill color. So in my color palette I'll click on this question mark and just select none. And you can see that's pretty basic looking. Now I'm going to select all my front facing edges, and I'm going to Object, Path, and offset the path. Here we're going to do a path offset of -4 pixels, so that'll bring in every single one of these squares by 4 pixels. Click on Preview to see what that looks like and hit OK. Now, with all of those selected, we're going to Effect, Stylize, and round their corners. And yes, I already had done this before. A radius of 6 pixels is what we want. Hit OK. Now, with all of that looking good, we're going to go to Object and Expand Appearance so that those rounded corners are actually applied to all of our shapes. Now, this next part requires a little skill with the mouse. We're going to zoom in for this. Right-click and ungroup all these squares. We want these grouped in a particular way. The easiest way I found to do this was to fill these with white, so you can just click in the middle of them. And then click in all the inner squares, and join those together with the Pathfinder. That's the unite command. Then drag and select all the squares and shift click on the ones you already united, and then unite those squares. And you can see what that's doing here. You see all these dividing lines separating these squares. Well, they're touching. So the unify command gets rid of those edges. It basically makes it a solid shape. Now with the direct select tool, select these little stars that have been created in the middle and double tap delete. We're going to flip around these, so select all of the faces and then do a Shift X. We'll even turn off the stroke color. That'll be really hard to see for you. I'll select the inner ones. And these inner squares here we're going to color blue. So in color, the tutorial has pretty specific blue named 0AAEEF. Hit OK and you can see those light right up. Now as a final touch for this face, we're going to add some shadows to each of these boxes and give them some depth. So now that they're already combined as one object, we're going to do a Control C, and then we're going to paste in place, so Control F, and actually 2 times Control F again. You're not seeing too much changing here, so once you've done that, unselect the boxes and select only the very top. Here, use your arrow keys on your keyboard to go right 3 times, that's 1, 2, 3, and up 3 times, that's 1, 2, 3. Now you can see that these have been raised from the original boxes. Hold down Shift on your keyboard and select this, and here's where Adobe CS3 and CS4 for Illustrator get a little bit different. In the Pathfinder, we're actually going to Alt-click this minus front command as opposed to fully just clicking on it. And then we're going to color that shadow a darker blue as well. The color there is 099AD4. Hit OK. And you can see that creates a little bit of a shadow. For the sake of you guys seeing what's going on here, I'll darken it up so you get a real sense of depth. So now we would be on the written tutorial step 25, where we do it all again. And on do it all again, you basically rinse and repeat the same process. And I'm going to run through that a little bit swifter now so you can see. I'm selecting that left-hand side, object, path, offset it, -4, hit OK, select them both, effect, stylize, round corners, 6, OK, object, expand. Now this is where I'm filling them all with white. And then direct select all the inner squares. And I will unite those. Select them all and shift select. Select them all, ungroup, and shift select our united squares. And I'll unite the outer squares. I'm going to Shift X on the outer squares and get rid of the stroke here. Use that direct selection to, one at a time, delete all these weird little diamonds that were made. Now I'm going to make these red, specifically F70D0D. I'm going to turn off the stroke, and the shadow on these is a Control C, Control F, Control F. Here I'm going to simply go up 2, 1, 2, and left 3, 1, 2, 3. With both of those selected, we're going to Alt-click on that minus front command and color these a darker red. So you can see the depth there. Now, since the bottom is at such an extreme angle, it will be treated slightly differently. So now our bottom is a little different. Before we get started on it, I'm just going to select all these other cube squares and Control 2 lock them down so we don't misclick anything. With all of these squares, we want to fill them with white and go to Object, Path, and we're only going to offset these by -2 pixels. We'll unify or unite those squares that we just made. And then both selected, the effect Stylized rounded corners will only be a 4 pixel rounded corner. So you can see everything's just kind of smaller because it's all sort of mushed together. Hit OK. We'll expand the appearance. I'm going to right click ungroup and we're going to right click ungroup again. With all these inner squares selected, we'll unite those. Now I'm going to take those squares that I united, just going to hide them. That's a Control 3. Select all of these, unify them. Now these aren't diamonds so much, but direct select, you can still select these weird pockets and delete them. Shift X, we'll turn that into solid black, and Control Alt 3 will show our original squares, and those are yellow, specifically EDD70C. Great, and we're going to turn off the stroke there as well. Now for the shadow on these, you can Control C and Control F, Control F. The shadow will be down 3, 1, 2, 3, left 1, 1. Select those bold, Alt click on the minus front. And I like to warm up my yellows when I make them darker. I think they're a little easier to deal with like that. So now we have this Rubik's Cube about done. Control Alt 2 will unlock our other faces and we can group those all so they're all in the same layer.